This is the Autistic Me Podcast, and I'm your host, Christopher Scott Wyatt. Since 2007, I have blogged about my experiences as an autistic student, educator, husband, and parent. This podcast builds on that effort by including guests from across the spectrum of neurodiversity. Links to the Autistic Me blog, podcast, and social media feeds are included in the show notes. I invite you to send me questions and suggestions for future episodes. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Now, the Autistic Me Podcast. I began speaking and blogging on my autistic experiences 14 years ago. The online autistic community was largely hidden away on LiveJournal, Wrong Planet, and Blogger. A handful of autistics also had virtual homes on Second Life. Today, autistic self-advocates express themselves on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. There's also a growing network of autistic podcasters. It's exciting to read, hear, and see young autistics representing our neurodiverse community. On this episode of the Autistic Me Podcast, we will be hearing from Sam Mitchell, a 19-year-old autistic podcaster. Sam hosts the podcast Autism Rocks and Rolls. I'm going to let Sam tell us about his journey into podcasting. His podcast has featured prominent autistics, allies of our community, and some rather surprising guests. Welcome to the Autistic Me Podcast, Sam.
Yeah, thank you again. It's so good to be here, dude.
Could you tell the audience how you entered podcasting?
Yes, I can. So after I joined my high school's media club, I didn't run our school's podcast by myself. I did it along with some of my peers. But I only knew the only way to continue my media skills was to start my own podcast. And that's when Autism Rocks and Rolls was born, starting my own journey. I wanted to take what I knew and make it my own.
When you say make it your own, you were looking for a way to discuss autism specifically or just your interest in general?
Well, that was actually an excellent question because my mother is an English teacher. And the purpose, the English teacher side came out of her. She said, "What's your purpose?" And I didn't know that actually. I thought, so I didn't know. So I kind of had a brainstorm think, well, what do you want to do here? And then I decided, you know what? I'm going to become an inspiring person. I want to help someone, at least. And I didn't know how. And I knew I had autism. So that's when I decided I'm going to make a podcast about autism. Now, we had to go down to the hobbies list. And it turns out I'm a big fan of rock music, like Elvis Presley, Nirvana, the Guns N' Roses, Queen, all those bands. So that's where Rocks and Rolls came from. We combined it together and named it Autism Rocks and Rolls.
You said you were in the high school media club, but then you started your own podcast. So how long ago did you start?
It was really in October 2019.
And how effective has that been as a platform for you as an autistic individual?
I would say it's actually been really good for me. It's really therapeutic. You know, I get to explain stuff that I never shared, that I've let the cat out of the bag, if that makes any sense. I get to share stuff that I've been wanting to say my whole entire life, but I've never had the opportunity to say it, but yet I had this opportunity to say what I've always wanted to say, and that is an honor and a blessing.
What do you think it is that you are bringing to the discussion about autism as a young person in the digital generation? You grew up with technology. You have never been without computers or the internet. What do you think you bring to this autism discussion?
It's going to sound kind of corny, but I'm relatable. I think I can relate to certain experiences, but also I think I can relate and explain the situations in a certain way that is relatable for everyone. Because I bet you've been in my boat probably sometimes. I bet everyone's been in a boat of having a big anxiety panic attack moment, if I had to guess.
Well, let's talk about some of those things. You mentioned the anxiety and the challenges of being autistic and yet also being relatable. Let's talk a little bit about your experiences as an autistic, not just a podcaster, but an autistic. How has autism shaped your identity?
Ooh, first of all, I'm going to compliment you. That is an excellent question. Really good question. But second, I think it's part of me. You know, if I didn't have autism, I don't think I'd be able to do some of the stuff that I'm doing. I want to be able to make a podcast about autism. I want to get to be an inspiration. I mean, is it a part of me? But I want to show there's other stuff that I can do. You know, if I wasn't autistic, I wouldn't be able to be a savant in pro wrestling and memorize all the WrestleMania main events.
I named this podcast The Autistic Me and the blog. Part of the goal was to bring out other autistics because each one of us is unique. I will admit I know nothing about sports, especially wrestling or anything like that. People tend to think that as autistics that we must have these niches and we must like certain things. How do you confront that? Because you mentioned rock and roll is one of your passions, and I don't think everyone imagines that. A lot of people think of autism as different. Here you are, an autistic rock and roll fan. That's part of who the autistic Sam is.
And I agree with that. But on the flip side, let me ask you a question. And I'm not trying to bash you or anything. I totally understand why you're doing this. But why say autistic rock and roll fan? Why not just say rock and roll fan?
I would agree with that. I think that I've written and spoken quite a bit how the autistic label for me is secondary to being a dad, being a father, being a teacher.
Yeah.
Autism is important to my identity. It's certainly part of the autistic experience. The autism is inseparable from who I am, but it isn't always what I want to be known as, certainly. And I appreciate that. That's a nice perspective to take along. Is I think most of us want to be known for what we do as artists, as creators.
Yeah, we don't need to be labeled as be artist, disabled writer. Why not just writer, blogger, painter, and maybe just say Aspie, not Aspie adding on to it.
And yet we both podcast and blog and do media appearances about autism. So in some ways, we're fortunate enough to be voices for the autistic community, while at the same time trying to remind people that we are not just defined by our autistic traits.
Correct. That's exactly what I want people to know. I mean, I probably have some traits that maybe someone would do on the spectrum, but I have traits that you wouldn't know if I had autism. I mean, I probably would have loved wrestling even if I don't have autism. I'm a wrestling fan, not an Aspie wrestling fan, just a wrestling fan.
You mentioned that you've memorized or you somehow recall some of the wrestling information.
Yeah, the main event matches. I can tell you all of them. And I'm not lying to you. I promise you I can.
So this is somewhat of the stereotype of the autistic with the detailed memory for a special interest.
Right. And I actually have my own view on that, if you don't mind me sharing. But what people used to call it, and they still call it, is obsessing. I don't call it that anymore. I call it practicing for our future skills. Because, in my opinion, if I had to, because what I like to do is I'm a hard worker. I don't work smarter. That's not how I am. I'm a hard worker. And if it includes me, what society calls obsessing and thinking about that topic or that wrestling or this every day, eating, sleeping, breathing it, and studying a little extra harder, then that's what I have to do.
You mentioned you have to work harder. Before the podcast, I was reading your website, and one of the things that comes out is that you are planning for a college future.
Yep, I'm in college right now. I'm going to a general college, which is like 20 minutes for me as of now for media. And then for general classes is what I meant. And then I'm transferring to another college for an hour, and that's for media or entrepreneurship.
And again, this fits into the idea that we aren't all one thing. You are pursuing your interest professionally through college and then career preparation.
Yep. I'm doing everything. And the best part is I've started early. I feel like I'm starting my passion a little early. That's working extra hard to me.
What is it you want to do after college?
Something with media or business. I have the mind of a businessman, I think, sometimes. Because it's kind of logical, sort of issue, but then sometimes you got to make really smart decisions. And I like to solve problems. I'm very big on that. Sometimes I just create problems to solve them. When
you started the podcast and started promoting it, then that let you play into your passion for business, and you are an entrepreneur.
Yes, sir. I am an entrepreneur. I monetize it. I have ad space. I sell merchandise. I have a Teespring website as well, where we have like hoodies and like little mugs, like those travel cups you kind of get. I don't have it with me right now, but it kind of looks like that, but it has the logo on it.
So you've turned this into a small business.
Yes, sir.
How have your family members supported this?
They have supported well. I have my mother, actually. She is my editor. And I actually have my grandfather. I call him the critiquer, but really, I wanted another perspective. I wanted like a worker's perspective, so that's why I have an editor. But I wanted another perspective. I want to see what another, just an ordinary, average, daily listener would think of it. And I had to go with my grandfather because he'll tell me how it is, and he won't bull crap me.
When you are producing a podcast, how do you go about determining your guests? How do you think about it? Do you look for other autistic voices? Do you look for people that just interest you? What makes you pull someone into the podcast as a guest?
I think that's a question for them because I just ask. And I don't know how I get all these guests, in all honesty. I think sometimes I just ask and just sound persuasive and they're in. So that's really a question for them.
Have you contacted these individuals specifically? Is that how that's worked? You've reached out to some of the autistic advocacy?
Yes.
Not celebrities, but...
Yes, sir. You can call them celebrities. I think they are because they've done a lot. But yes, I've contacted them like face-to-face. Not face-to-face, but like Facebook Messenger, Twitter, like all that, finding their social media accounts. Their publicists, whatever you can find. I found them. So to answer your question, yes, I just ask them like old-fashioned, kind of like a virtual face-to-face is what I call it.
Taking a look at that list, you have had bands, you've had performance artists, race car drivers. It is an amazing variety of guests.
Thank you. And I want to keep it that way. I don't want to just keep it all bland, strictly race cars. I think that's boring. Because they have the same story, probably share a similar story. I like the variety. I want to mix it up a little different because everyone's got a story. They just have to share it when it comes to autism, but it's just a little different each time.
Which guest do you think you've learned the most from?
Ooh, man, probably a guest I learned the most from is actually probably Temple Grandin. She is we're on the spectrum, but oh my goodness, we think differently. She is a very visual thinker. I don't think in pictures at all. I think in words. Sometimes I'll take things literally. I know she does too, but she's a picture, like she has to like picturize it. I got to hear what you're saying. I got to auditory hear it to make it logical with me.
That's interesting. I am a very visual person, but I can see words in my mind.
What do you mean by that?
If I'm working on a computer program or web development, I can see the code before I type the code, which I've never been able to explain to someone, but I know Dr. Grandin understands. I can see the page before I create the page, if that makes sense. I know where I'm going.
Yeah, and that makes more sense now.
And I think it's interesting that you mentioned Temple as teaching you the most. I was fascinated because I have seen interviews with Mick. And for those who don't know, can you explain who Mick Foley is?
Mick Foley is probably the craziest professional wrestler I ever met. He has taken a lot of hard bumps, but he has a son on the spectrum, and there's a big soft teddy bear to him. He's basically Santa Claus 24/7.
Did that surprise you that here's a man who has one image on television and elsewhere, and yet deep down he is an advocate, an ally, part of a neurodiverse family? Did that surprise you?
It did, actually, because you don't expect people like that to be one of the nicest guys on the street. I mean, he's so humble, he's so grateful. Yeah, he plays this wackadoodles characters, but it was just all in character. It wasn't real at all. So it kind of did surprise me.
You have had a number of autistic performers on your podcast as well. And in some way, podcasting is performance as well as public speaking. What do you think you've learned from interviewing the performers who have been on some of the singing contest programs and those shows that I would find it very impossible to be up on stage knowing millions of people are going to be judging how I perform? So did you learn anything from interviewing those individuals?
Well, to be honest with you, no, but we have something in common. I'll answer with that. We don't care what people think of us. The way I get on stage and the way I get on motivational speaking and the way I view podcasts, it's simple. I don't care if you like it. It's my thing at the end of the day. And I know I sound kind of defensive, but it's the truth. I make it for, not for me, but for others. If you don't like it, I apologize, but there's probably someone who does like it. You know, the performers, there's probably someone out there right now that thinks they're probably not the best performers alive, but there's probably someone out there who does think it. That's what we need to focus on.
Your message to listeners is that you are a podcaster, a creator, an entrepreneur, an aspiring business owner who happens to be autistic.
Right.
How do you then balance being an autistic advocate and wanting to be known for those other talents?
Well, the biggest thing for me it's not really an autistic advocate. It's a mental health advocate for me, a disability advocate. That's who I am, not an autistic advocate. Is being autism and looking out for others on the spectrum part of me? Yes. But it's for all disabilities. It's for someone with a Crohn's disease, spina bifida, epilepsy, all those in one together. It's a disability advocate. So that's how I like to describe it personally. If
you could do this into the future professionally, is that something that you would enjoy, doing interviews in the media? Possibly, I could see a cable talk show or something like that. Is that something you really enjoy?
Yeah, like it's on stage, and until I've learned not caring what people think of me, I've always wanted to go on stage. So I'm kind of wanting to do that more often now, and be in the front of the camera more often and play a character kind of. So in a way, yes, but be myself at the same time. I always encourage people to be themselves, and I try to be myself every day, and I want everyone else to follow in the same footsteps as me, to be themselves and to be them, not following the path of someone else's, but to be them.
I want to ask some questions that I know you've answered many times before, but for my listeners, can you explain, first off, when were you diagnosed as autistic?
Sure. I don't know the full story. I can't give you like the full-blown details, but I can tell you I was diagnosed when I was 4, and the reason being why my mother and father thought that was I did not like loud noises, and I hated fireworks, which oddly I love now.
So you were diagnosed at 4 years old?
Yes, sir.
Compared to myself, I was diagnosed at 37. So that again goes to the generational difference of greater awareness of autism, possibly?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, for me, when I got told it just felt like my life made sense. You know? I bet you felt the same way if I had to guess.
And were you told as a child in school?
Not in school. I was actually read a book by my mother. It's actually Understanding Sam, who has Asperger's syndrome. And when I was reading, I thought, this is me. This makes sense now. And I'm a straightforward type of guy. I'm like, okay, you don't need to spoil. I'm going to spill the beans, cut the crap. I have this, don't I? This is where you're going with it. And then she was like, yes, you do, my son. And then I was going through the fast, like, I knew it. Because my life just made sense. And it just explained a lot of stuff to me.
How old were you when you realized and you were told you were autistic?
6.
So I have 2 daughters who are 8 and 9, and they know they're different. And that's one of the things we've talked about is, what does it mean to be autistic or to be ADHD? What does it mean to have a neurodiverse family? What does that mean to say that we're neurodiverse? I wondered, how does that feel? Since I wasn't a child when I was an adult, how does that feel when you're 8 or younger and find out you're autistic? And you're saying it wasn't upsetting, it wasn't shocking to you.
No. Maybe it was because I was the odd duck out, I don't know. But it just made sense. It just, it put the puzzles together for a minute. My life finally was a puzzle for a minute. But I mean, after a while, I went back to discombobulated. But for that split second, it was like, oh my goodness, I've opened my eyes now. This makes complete sense.
In the many years that I've been speaking now and writing, I've made a list of the most common questions I get at public appearances or via email to the social media accounts. The most common questions are about education, careers, and social connections like friendships. Education comes first. So I'll ask you the same thing everyone seems to ask me. How did you succeed in school, especially high school?
Well, in school, it was a bit of a rough patch for me. I'm not going to lie to you. The staff and facility, I would recommend that was amazing. I would say my school was probably the best for special needs, and I'm obviously biased because I went there. But if you had to tell me, I would have said the school is that's the best. And that's just my opinion. But that being said, the students, they didn't take me to Hardyville. I was excluded a lot. I got bullied a lot. I had to deal with that. And sometimes the saddest part was I was bullied and I didn't realize it up until I was told, or I saw it now, but I didn't see it back then. That hurts. That really hurts. And it makes you a little mad. I mean, I'm not like boiling up here a little bit. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like mad at all. I'm used to it like a little bit now. But that's what really hurts, is when you were being told, hey, you were just bullied, man. You know that? It stinks. It really stinks. Because it's better to know than not know.
I would agree. And it's something that unfortunately doesn't stop after school. You find yourself getting bullied in the workplace or in organizations, and you don't know it. In my case, it's my wife, who's known me most of my life, who will say, you realize you were just bullied. Oh, okay. Oops. Yeah, I don't pick up on it. I miss the signs that someone's being sarcastic or someone's being pushy. It's something I think parents and other autistics need to hear, is that you're not alone. We get bullied and people say things and we miss it. We don't always get the social signals. And it does make, especially I think, middle school and high school challenging.
I would agree with that 100%. Life is challenging already for us. So honestly, I mean, my staff is great, but sometimes it's hard to fit in sometimes with everyone in the world. And society puts that pressure on us that we have to fit in with everyone. And that's a ridiculous put on for us, in my opinion.
The academic supports you received in the last 10, 15 years have got to be significantly better than the supports of the 1970s and 80s.
Oh, yeah. I've heard stories. I've heard you were institutionalized, and that wasn't right to me at all.
It's good to hear that you felt supported by some of the academic staff and faculty. It's nice to hear.
Thank you. I'm so happy that I was at the right school at the right time, honestly, I feel like.
Do you think your mother being a teacher helped with that?
I would say yes. I think so. I mean, she's seen me bullied too, and sometimes I realize that kind of hurt her. But she has a lot of respect for special needs people, and she is one of a kind person, let me tell you that much. But she tries to promote that in her classroom a lot as well.
Your mother is an 8th grade teacher, so she's dealing with middle school, and she also works with gifted and talented students. How did she navigate or help you navigate as a team the special education system and all of the things that go along with being diagnosed autistic in the schools? What were you part of the discussions for the IEPs and the 504s?
Oh, yeah. Okay, that makes more sense. Yes, I was a part of it. I mean, I sat in and I understood what was going on. I understood what I needed. They understood what I needed, and it worked out perfectly.
Your mother actively included you in those meetings and processes.
Oh, yeah. She was probably the most inclusive person alive, honestly.
Do you think that your teachers understood your needs, or did they have apprehensions about discovering you were autistic?
Most are accepting. I mean, some probably don't give two craps or boguses, but most were amazing and cared and understood what I needed. And I gave them what they needed, and it worked out perfectly in high school, middle school, and elementary.
Going to that second topic that I hear about from followers and audiences when I speak, employment, you have a career plan or at least some ambitions. Many of the autistics and parents of autistics that I meet are afraid that they will never have jobs and that they will never succeed. You don't seem to have any concerns with your future. You seem to be pretty confident.
I mean, I do have concerns about my future. I'm not going to lie. I mean, even though it looks good, I mean, I still have things like, am I going to make it? Am I going to make it? Like, what's going to happen if this happens, this happens, this happens, that happens? But I can't dwell on it. I mean, I have to keep that. Otherwise, if I do, I'll go back to square one. I'm like, I'm not making it. To heck with this. I'm living here for the rest of my life. And it's part of a problem, too. You know, not a lot of people on the spectrum are getting jobs. It's because people don't think they can do anything. They're hesitant. And that needs to change. People need to grow up. honestly, and be inclusive for others so that we can have the opportunity that we so desire. A job can help us with a lot of life skills that maybe that schools doesn't teach us.
Have you had part-time jobs or full-time jobs during the summers during your education?
Sure, I can name a couple. Through the summer, I worked with my father on a hay farm, so that I always enjoyed that. I kind of had to sadly leave that because he got a tie grabber off. It kind of made me a little mad because I really enjoyed it. But anyway, I also got to work at a boarding place at a Top Dog pet retreat last summer. That was a really good job, but I had a blast, really.
Those employment experiences, do you think they've helped you prepare for future?
I would say yes. And I also took something that might interest you. I was in a JAG program. It stands for Jobs for American Graduates. It teaches you job skills. But I would say that helped along with those, and you combine those together, it worked perfectly. I feel like I can actually like do a business meeting, I feel like now, than I probably could a while back ago. And I feel like I learned how to socialize in a work environment rather than a home environment, because I feel like everyone should socialize the same way. But I kind of learned in a workplace you can't socialize sometimes, and you can't be the goofball.
You mentioned socializing. So the third thing that people ask me is about the social connections. A lot of the parents, more so than the autistics, are concerned that their child won't have friends or won't have those social connections. My wife and I have our daughters in things like swimming, soccer, Girl Scouts to help them with their social skills. I don't believe that I can make my child have friends. That's not my job. If she wants friends, she will decide to have friends. I have a very small network of very close friends, and I'm happy. And when people say, well, why aren't you out there partying or doing whatever, I'm happy with the few friends I have, and they are valuable. How successful have you been at building a social network outside of your family? And how important is the network to you?
Well, I'm going to kind of start off with what you said. You said that you have a few friends and you're happy with that. First of all, that is fine. I'm not going to diss that at all. I'm not like that. It's like an addiction almost, to be honest with you. It's like I keep drinking the Kool-Aid and I can't stop. I want to keep making friends 24/7. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's probably important to me because I now can socialize. I didn't have that 15 years ago. Now I have that. Now I'm ready to utilize it. And while I've gotten a lot of no's, I've got some yeses. So I tend to cope with the no's and not hear all the negativity and not be sad on the no's. I focus on the yeses rather than the no's.
When parents express concerns about autistics making friends, my answer is that we will find the friends we're meant to have.
I would say so as well. And to me, it takes time. I don't like time. I hate it. I'll be the first guy to admit it. I'm like, get it done, boom, move on to the next task. That's how I am. This is one of the cases where I had to accept that it takes time. You can't be like, oh, buddy, woohoo, let's be friends. I learned that. You can't do that. You can't jump in. You have to take baby steps. You have to build the steps, I like to call it. You might build the steps a little faster, but you got to build the steps and finally reach in the middle.
I find it much easier to talk to people in a class I'm teaching, at a conference, or on the podcast than face-to-face, one-on-one. How would you describe your experiences? Are you comfortable one-on-one, or are you more comfortable in situations like this where we're podcasting?
Let's put it this way. The fewer, the better. I'll first start off with that, but I can do big groups if it's with people I know. Like if it's with me, the guy who you saw, and then my other friends, I could be like the biggest person alive. But let's add someone new to the mix. Let's add all the people I know and that one person to the mix. I'm going to shut down a little bit because I don't want to offend them. And I don't want to say the wrong thing. That's why I'm a kind of a reserved, quiet person. It's not because I'm a shy guy. I don't want to go, hi, bud. But I want to not offend this person at the same time. And because I have no filter, I am so frightened to do that. It's been a fear of mine since I've been a teenager. And I still have that fear as an adult or going into adulthood.
I find that I frequently offend people by being blunt and saying exactly what's on my mind.
Oh, I do too, buddy. We're in the same boat with that. That's why I'm so frightened of that now. Like, it is a constant fear of mine. And I feel more comfortable around family because I feel like I can say whatever the heck I want around them. But when it gets around friends or new people, we have to cut the edges a little bit.
Were you very socially active in high school? Did you have a set of friends that you went out and did things with?
Oh, yeah, I would say that, yes. Probably not as much freshman year, but sophomore through senior year, I would tell you yes.
One of my experiences as a young person and even into college was making friends that I assumed were friends, that seemed like friends, but in the end, they wanted
to hit you.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it was they wanted. They didn't really want a friendship. I just was able to do things that were to their advantage. I could help with the homework. I could answer the physics problems. I could do something on the computer. It wasn't that they wanted to be my friend. It's that I just happened to be able to provide a useful set of answers or solutions to problems they had.
Yeah, I've been through those too, man. I really have been. I mean, I've kind of said to people face to face, here's the deal. And I feel like if you're using me, I will tell you, I'll be like, hey, like, do that. I feel like you're using me. What's going on here? I thought this was supposed to be a friendship, not a one-sided one guy do the work ordeal.
How has your life improved as you've gained speaking and social skills?
It makes me feel happier, honestly. I mean, I am still frightened to do it. I mean, it's the scariest thing to do alive still, but I feel like I have to do it. Because if I don't, I'll go back to the guy I was. And I don't want to go back to him. I want to be a better person. I want to be the bigger guy and talk and share my story, but also share my talents and share my ideas and share of just a happy-going friendship with a great sense of humor and a fun one too.
I've had several autistic comics on the podcast and on the blog. We've talked to them. The idea that there's autistics with humor seems to surprise people. They don't expect us to be funny.
We have our own sense of humor. Maybe a little dry, blunt humor, sarcastic humor as well, I would say. I'm a little sarcastic, even though I don't understand when people are being sarcastic. I can be sarcastic at times. But also that's kind of very funny and had to be very explainable, I guess, if that makes any sense.
If someone's interested in hearing your podcast, what is the website for Autism Rocks and Rolls?
Yeah, I can help you out. So you can find me on Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, LinkedIn, Stitcher, YouTube. And you can find me on autismrocksandrolls.com, where it has all my information. I want to promote my mission, and I want to promote the fact that how far I came, but mainly my mission and how far anyone with a disability can come over the obstacles and go through it. I don't care who you are, whatever obstacles you like, or what obstacles you have in life, you can go through them. Trust me. I've been through many myself. If I can do it through the hard times, you can do it too.
You mentioned the hard times. Do you discuss those on your podcast?
Yep. I have to. Otherwise, I want to be able to have a great podcast, man.
For the curious who are thinking about tuning in, what are some of the most difficult subjects that you've tackled?
Friendships. It's so hard to make friends for me. It's been the hardest thing in my life to do. It's even harder to be a converse with someone because I'm afraid of being a weird guy and popping the bubbles and talking about pepperoni pizza when they're talking about media over there.
Do you worry that the struggles you had in the past will return? And how do you address that?
If they do, so be it. I'll get over it, honestly, because I am afraid, but it's a good afraid. Anytime I come back to, anytime I try to come back to that person, I put the fear of God in myself. As Gordon Ramsay did once. I'm a big fan. He didn't have the best childhood. Anytime he came close to me as father, he put the fear of God into himself. That's what I've had to do with me. Anytime I had to feel like going back to the old guy, I feel like I had to put the fear of God in myself so I didn't have to or want to. And it's worked out pretty darn well for me if I said myself.
What's the biggest struggle you've had that you attribute to the autism?
Maybe I'll give you another one, making plan Bs. I don't do plan Bs, brother. I either do it or I don't do it. We don't compromise. We don't meet in the middle. I don't like that. I think it's dumb, personally, sometimes. We either do it and have a blast, or we just say screw it and move on. It's easier.
your podcast is starting to build a following. The website's starting to build traffic. And I really admire that you're doing this at 19 years old.
Yes, sir.
That is phenomenal. I admire that greatly. I hope my children are as engaged and as daring, because it takes a lot of courage to do a podcast and to be out there for people.
Thank you. I do my best to spread a mission of acceptance. You can only focus on tomorrow. I mean, even though I didn't know I'd do this for a living, who knows where I'd be, actually, in all honesty, but yet here I am. And that is an improvement of my life right there.
If you could tell us one thing that you think defines Sam Mitchell, what would that one thing be?
Creative. I'm a very out-of-the-box thinker. I'm a creative writer. I want to create and make stuff up and create ideas. Ideas for an episode. Ideas for how to make the world a better place. Ideas for my family. Just ideas anywhere.
That's fantastic. I really admire what you're bringing to the discussion, and I am so humbled by what younger autistics are now accomplishing, that past generations were just told we couldn't do those things. We didn't belong in the workplace. I was told that I shouldn't be a teacher because I couldn't read vocal and facial expressions well. So we were told a lot of the times, give up, stop. Go do something else, go be an accountant or do something with numbers, but you're autistic. You can't be a creator.
Wrong on that.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see what your generation's doing, and what I hope my daughters will be doing is not being held back by anti-disability, ableism, low expectations of what we can be, when everyone really should have the same expectations for us as, well, everyone. We should all have good expectations of people.
Yes, everyone in this world should have great expectations for the other. I know you got to be a little leery at the end because everyone's not like that. But there's still good in this world. I promise you that. There's still hope and there's light at the end of the tunnel.
What do you want people to know more than anything else?
That we're not dumb. That if you think that the next guy who has autism is an idiot, you're dead wrong. We're smart. We're brave. We're all these amazing traits, but you don't let us show us. So please let us show us what we can do. Let's not focus on how bad we're at math. Let's focus on how good we are at writing and English as an example. Focus on the greats. Focus on the gifts, not focus on the downfalls.
Do you find yourself fighting some of the stereotypes of autism?
Yes, sir. But you know what? It's a fight I want to fight, and it's a fight I'm willing to fight.
I am very glad you're out there doing it, and I know you'll be doing it long after I have retired my microphone and my teaching hat, as it were. I thank you for being out there as a young man and an advocate for the disabled. It's nice that we're all in this together.
Thank you for letting me on and having the honor of being a part of your journey as well.
I want to thank Sam Mitchell for being on the Autistic Me. All of our journeys are different. Every autistic person has struggled in a unique way. Our struggles are not all the same, but we have the same issues with being accepted. We want people to accept us for who we are, and who we are is so much more than just the autistic. We are, as Sam said, we are creators. We are innovators. We are scientists and researchers and teachers, business people. We are all those things. Sam, thank you for being a part of the disability community and the autistic community.
Thank you.
If there's anyone interested in contacting Sam, please visit autismrocksandrolls.com. That's where Sam's information is. That's also where he has links to his services as a public speaker and advocate. I believe that's also where you have some of the links to your merchandise.
Mm-hmm. Yep, at teespring.com too.
I'll be sure to include all of the links we've discussed on the show notes. I want to thank again Sam for participating in the Autistic Me, and for our listeners. We both appreciate everyone who listens to our podcast and podcasts from the rest of the disabled communities. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Autistic Me.